Hey there, this is Greg from Microsoft Hates Greg, and today in this video we are going to be doing an in-depth look on these functions right here, these quick measures right here, the lookup max, lookup min, lookup max simple, and lookup min simple. And this is really the direction that we're heading in this channel. We're going to be creating videos on each and every one of these measures or groups of measures and how to use them within the tool. So if you want to keep informed on new videos as we create them, then hit that like and subscribe buttons, and you'll be informed every time we come out with a new video. All right, so let's dig into lookup max, lookup min. Now, to give you a little bit of background on this, I have a copy of the original PBX file that I used to create and publish out the lookup min max quick measure that's in the quick measures gallery out on the Power BI community site. So this is a copy of it, and the original scenario that was presented was I have this table and I have this column that has categories or labels or whatever you want to call them. And I've got some values, and I want to sum up these values and then figure out which category is associated with the maximum or the minimum of those summed values. Now in this case, it's pretty simple because this is made up data to figure out that it's, the maximum is always going to be C and the minimum is always going to be A. But obviously with real data, you may not know that just by looking at the data. So that was the original scenario for the lookup min max. So let's take a look at how to do this in the tool. So in the interface here, I have a list of the tables and columns that are in my data model. And what you want to do is what you want to select in this panel here is you want to select the column that you eventually want to return a value for. All right, you want to return the C or the A or the B. So in that case, you want to click item in the table, and then you're going to choose your lookup max, for example. You're presented with this configuration screen. You have an aggregation and you have a lookup column. I'm probably going to modify this name to be a little more clear, but this is the value that you're going to be aggregating in order to find the max value of, and then return the associated item for it. So I'm going to set this to my value column, click OK. I've got this set to sum. It's a measure, the value, I generate the DAX for it. And as you can see here, the table that you're in gets plugged in as the table here and here, for example. And then the column that you've selected over here gets plugged in as the item, as the category that you're summing, the grouping, if you will. And also gets plugged in down here when you're returning the item that's associated with the max value. I create this value column within this summarized table, and I'm using the aggregation sum, and I'm summing the value that I've selected, the column that I've selected here. I then grab the max x of that, so returns the maximum of value within this summarized table. And then I have a final max xx where I filter this table to where the value equals that max value, and then I return my item. So that's how it works in a nutshell. Min x, the minimum version, works identically. We just plug in min x everywhere. The summarization, if I change this to count and I regenerate my DAX, then my aggregation changes. And in the case of the data here, right, if I used count, I would return, A, B, and C would all have the same number of rows. So if I wanted to find all of those and return all of those, I could actually edit this last min x here. I could change this to concatenate x, and then I would add the final third parameter here to my separator, and then I would return a string that would be A, comma B, comma C, for example. So if you want, where you may have more than one maximum value or item that's associated with the same max value, then that's how you can get around that, and just by using concatenate x. All right, so then let's look at lookup max simple. Really, the only difference is between lookup max and lookup max simple, or lookup min and lookup min simple, is that all I do is I get rid of that summarization of the table. I just use the table, and the rest of the code is identical. So that's the difference between the two. So in this case of lookup max simple, I would be looking up, it would find the value of 3000 and return C, and the min version would find the value 10 and return A. That's how to use these in the tool. But let's go a little more in depth, and I'll show you some alternative ways of doing the same thing, why the code is structured the way it is or coded the way it is. We'll even do a, there's been some updates around DAX that have made the lookup min and max simple versions of this. There's a better way of doing it. So let's go ahead and dig into that right now. All right, so what you can see here is, as you can see, this is using my lookup max. This is the original formula code that's generated by Lookup, the tool. And of course, I'm always getting questions around my DAX code, or I use a lot of the X aggregator functions, and I don't tend to use calculate and that sort of thing. So could we use calculate to get rid of these iterator functions, the X versions of the max, min, etc., sum X? Answer is sort of yes, but I'm not sure it really buys you anything. So let's dig into it. I've got this version of where I'm using calculate in the last line. And I could use calculate. I could find the max of my item, where I filter my table down to the value equals the max. Now, the question is, does this buy you anything? Yes, you can do it. But in this case, you're filtering down to a single row. And so you're just iterating over a single row table. So not really buying much by using calculate here versus the iterator functions, in my opinion. Now, and specifically because you're filtering down to such a small number of rows, using an iterator function across a one row table isn't really a performance issue. But what about this max here? Could we use calculate in this instance? And the answer is yes, we could do that, but then we still have to use the max XX within the calculate, which then doesn't really buy us anything. Now, could I use max instead of max X? And the answer is no, and here's why. So the reason is because this max here, it doesn't like virtual tables. That's one of my big complaints against calculate is really when you start working with virtual tables, it becomes fairly useless. Because the max and the min and the other base aggregation functions, they want a physical table and a physical column to work with. And so trying to do something like this, calculate just can't handle it. It's just not flexible enough to handle those kinds of scenarios. So one of the big reasons I tend not to use calculate is because I tend to use virtual tables in my variables. I like to do that. And that's a whole other topic that I can get into on maybe later videos. But so we know we can't really use calculate in that instance. And that's this version here. Okay, so now when it comes to lookup min max simple, though, the story changes a bit. So in this case, again, this is the code generated by Lookup currently. And really I didn't really do much optimization on this. I literally copied the DAX code definition, and I just wiped out the summarization and left the rest of the code the same. So this is not the most efficient code, admittedly, and this can be improved upon. So could we use calculate in this case versus using max XX? And the answer is yes, we could. We could say calculate and then the max of the table value. But if we can do this, we can also do this. We don't need to calculate, right? Calculate is just entirely superfluous. And I see this a lot in people's code. They throw calculate in everywhere thinking it's going to do some kind of magic for them. And that only works with rank X, where you use calculate and it magically fixes your rank X measures. But in most other formulas, the calculate just is meaningless. So I see that a lot. And I think it comes from people not really understanding DAX or the code in that, but you don't need calculate. All you need is the max. You just need that. Now, all that being said, Microsoft recently made a modification to calculate, which fixed another really annoying thing that I had about calculate. And that was that you couldn't use min and max within the filter clauses of your calculate function, right? So I've got this version though here now. They fixed this. And this used to really annoy me because it made no sense to me why you couldn't do it. And apparently somebody at Microsoft agreed and they fixed it. So now what you could actually do is you can actually say, you could actually collapse that entire lookup min max simple function to a single calculate statement, which should be more performant, and get rid of all the iterators, right? Because now I can say max of my table item. So that's what I'm going to eventually return. And then my filter clause, I have my table value equal the max of the table value. You didn't used to be able to do this. If you tried to do this in the older versions of calculate, it would return an error. I think the actual error was like, you can't use min and max in the filter clause of your calculate statement. Something very specific. But they fixed it. So now this version then is probably the best version that we could have for the min max simple. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to update mushcookum. I'm going to take in and edit it live, and we're going to edit that and then show how that works. But before we do that, one last version is, hey, I'm looking things up. Shouldn't I use lookup value? And the answer is yes, you could use lookup value for the simple versions of min and max. So here I've got a version of lookup value. This is what I'm going to be returning. This is what I'm going to look up, and this is the value I'm looking up. So I'm looking up the max of my table and my value. So yes, you could use lookup value for the simple versions of min and max, lookup min max. But I tend to avoid lookup value. Why do I tend to avoid lookup value? I don't find that it's very performant. So if I don't have to use it, I don't want to use it. For example, if you're trying to look up a value in a related table, it's better to use related versus lookup. The other thing is I've had some quirkiness with lookup value over the years. Where I've tried to use it, I know that I have unique values that I've filtered down to in terms of the search criteria, and it still returns blank in certain cases, and I've never been able to explain why. But I've never had that problem if I use max XX and then filter. So I tend to avoid lookup value at all costs. I just don't find it a very performant or a very useful function, and it's quirky. So with that all said, let's take this formula we have right here and let's go update the measure definition for lookup min max simple. And what I'll do is I will go ahead and close this because I'm going to recompile. And this is the code for mushcookum. As you can see in the resources directory, I have this supported measures.json file. And this contains all the measure definitions for all the different measures that are supported by mushcookum. And as you can see here, I've got my lookup min, and there's my DAX definition. I've got lookup max, there's my DAX definition, and same thing for lookup min simple and lookup max simple. Now you may be wondering, this doesn't really look like good DAX, but what's going on here is that these are parameters. Anything with underscore in front of it and then underscore at the end, these are all replacement text that I'm going to replace. So what I do within the tool is obviously this becomes a string, and then I can do a replace function and replace param _1 with whatever's been chosen in the tool, right? So that's how this all works. So I can actually then simply edit this code in order to change the definition of the DAX that's generated by mushcookum. So I can paste in my new measure definition. And what I'll need to do then is I'll need to replace any instance of table with the parameter. And replace it there, and replace it here. All right. So now item is my column. So I'll copy that, and we will place that here. And I love editing JSON in Visual Studio. I should probably have done it in Notepad. It'd been better. And then I need to get my parameter, and then I need to replace this value with parameter 1 here and here. All right, so now I don't have an aggregation, so I can just leave this max and this max. Of course, it's min, so let's copy this. And we'll change this to, again, this min max does not matter. Could be min or max. This min does matter. All right, so now we have this correct. And I can go here and delete that. And so now my measure definition in Mushcookum, once I recompile and rerun it, when I choose Lookup Min Simple, it will return this version of the DAX versus the old version of the DAX. So now I've copied that other measure definition with the max value. So I got max and I've got max here. And I need to get rid of all of this. And that should look pretty good. All right, so now I probably don't need to rebuild, but I'll rebuild. Great, everything's good. Now, if we messed any of this JSON up, what's going to happen when we relaunch Mushcookum is that if it can't serialize the JSON correctly, it's going to go into a kind of state of suspended animation, if you will. We'll get an icon, but it won't actually run the tool. So that's what happens. So be careful when you're editing the JSON, because you can actually find this file. It's out here in the resources directory. So wherever you installed it, in the resource directory, there's your supported measures. And you actually open that up in Notepad. We can search for lookup. Now, as you can see, here's our measure definitions. And as you can see on our simple versions, we've updated those to be the calculate version of min max simple. So in theory, if I didn't mess anything up, I can go back here and I can relaunch the tool. This is my debug version. And apparently we didn't mess up the JSON, so it came up just fine. We can choose item. We can choose lookup max simple. We will set our value column, generate the DAX, and as you can see, it's our new definition for the measure. Now, if I hit, let's see, I need to name this, looks like 3, and hit create. All right, there we go. And as you can see, we have our new definition of that measure. And if we copy this, paste it, and plug in our new measure definition, we return C still. So that is it for the in-depth look on Lookup Min Max within Mushcookum. Again, if you like this video, want to see more, then hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Have a good day.